There's a specific kind of tiredness that isn't about sleep. You know the one. You wake up rested, coffee in hand, and within 11 minutes you've already lost the thread of whatever you were supposed to be doing. Not because you're lazy, not because the task was hard, but because something reached out and pulled you somewhere else. And the strange part is, you let it. You always let it. We tend to narrate this as a personal failure, a willpower problem, a character flaw dressed up in the language of productivity. I need to be more disciplined. I need to focus better, as if the issue lives entirely inside you, like a muscle you forgot to train. But consider, for a moment, a different frame. What if your attention, the raw, irreplaceable hours of your conscious experience, is the most valuable resource on Earth? Not oil, not data, not labor. Attention. And what if an entire industrial apparatus worth trillions of dollars, employing the sharpest minds of our generation, has been specifically engineered, not designed, engineered, to extract it from you at scale? This isn't a conspiracy. It doesn't need to be. It's just economics. The product isn't the app. The product isn't the content. The product is the next 2 seconds of your focus. Then the 2 seconds after that, multiplied by 3 billion people, 20 hours a day, compounded over decades. That's the business model. And it is working almost perfectly. To understand how we got here, you have to go back to a concept that predates smartphones by about a century. In 1930, an economist named Harold Hodaling published a paper about competition. His central insight, now called Hodaling's Law, was counterintuitive. In a free market, competing sellers tend to converge. They don't spread out to serve different customers, they cluster. They become, over time, nearly identical. His classic example was 2 ice cream vendors on a beach. Logically, they each should take an end of the beach and serve their respective halves. But that's not what happens. Each vendor, trying to steal customers from the other, gradually moves toward the center until they're standing next to each other. Both vendors lose efficiency. Most of the beach goes unserved, but neither can afford to move. The attention economy is Hodaling's beach, except the beach is your limbic system, and the vendors have neuroscientists on staff. Every major platform converges on the same behavioral vulnerabilities, not because they're talking to each other, because they're all running the same optimization function: maximize time on platform. And the fastest path to that output isn't quality, it isn't meaning, it's arousal. Physiological, emotional, neurological arousal. The feeling of something happening. The low-grade electric hum of maybe the next thing will be interesting. This is not an accident, it is an architecture. In 2016, a former Google design ethicist named Tristan Harris testified before Congress. He described a phenomenon he called the race to the bottom of the brainstem. When platforms compete for attention, they inevitably discover that the most reliable triggers aren't the highest ones. Curiosity, beauty, wonder, they're the lowest ones. Outrage, anxiety, jealousy, the desire for social validation so old it predates language.
Harris used an analogy that's worth sitting with. He said, if you're a chess player and your opponent is a slot machine, you will lose. Not because you're worse at chess, but because you're playing the wrong game. The slot machine doesn't want to beat you at chess. It wants you to stop playing chess entirely. What's striking about this framing is what it implies about agency. We've spent years thinking about the attention economy as a seduction problem. Something lures you in and you need stronger resistance. But seduction assumes you chose to engage. What Harris and others in that tradition are describing is something more structural. The environment itself has been reconfigured so that the default state, the path of least resistance, leads directly into the machine. Psychologists call this choice architecture. The way options are presented determines, more than we like to admit, which option gets chosen. Design determines behavior. And for 15 years, the most sophisticated designers in human history have been paid extraordinary sums to make one particular choice, open the app, keep scrolling, feel not just easy, but almost inevitable.
There's a psychological mechanism underneath all of this that deserves its own examination. It's called variable ratio reinforcement, and B.F. Skinner identified it in pigeons in the 1950s. Skinner found that animals learn fastest and most persistently when rewards are unpredictable. Not when every lever press produces food, not when no lever press produces food, but when some lever presses produce food, randomly, without pattern. The uncertainty is the hook. The not knowing creates a compulsive checking behavior that persists even when the reward stops coming. The scroll is the lever. The like is the food pellet. And the genius, if you want to call it that, of the modern social feed is that it industrialized Skinner's pigeons at civilizational scale. What you're experiencing when you check your phone for the 14th time in an hour isn't weakness. It's a learned behavior, shaped over months and years by an environment that was purpose-built to shape exactly that behavior. The anxiety that arrives when you don't check isn't a character flaw. It's the trained response of a nervous system that has been conditioned to expect the possibility of reward. You are, in the most clinically precise sense of the term, responding to your training. Now here is where it gets psychologically interesting, because the story doesn't end at exploitation. There's a concept in phenomenology called intentionality, the idea that consciousness is always of something. Attention, by its nature, is directed. You cannot simply attend, you attend to. And this creates a peculiar problem for the human animal. We have an enormous capacity for focus, but no neutral setting. When external demands on attention are removed, the mind doesn't rest. It wanders. It rumbles. It becomes uncomfortable. Psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert ran a large-scale study in 2010 using a phone app that interrupted people at random intervals to ask, "What are you doing? Are you thinking about what you're doing? And how happy are you?" Their finding was stark. People's minds wandered roughly 47% of the time. And that mind wandering, regardless of the activity, consistently correlated with lower reported happiness. The implication is subtle but important. It isn't just that distraction companies exploit our attention, it's that they exploit a pre-existing vulnerability, our discomfort with the quiet. The mind wandering that makes us miserable was always there. The attention economy didn't create it. It just learned to monetize it. This changes the analysis because it means the system isn't fighting against our nature. In a strange way, it's accommodating it. It is filling a void that the mind generates on its own. Consider what a fully captured attention looks like at the aggregate level.
In 2023, the average American spent approximately 7 hours per day looking at screens. That's not a statistic about teenagers. That's the average across the entire adult population. 7 hours. Out of roughly 16 waking hours, that's nearly half of conscious life routed through a surface that someone else owns and optimizes. Those 7 hours aren't uniform. Some of them are work, navigation, communication, functional screen time with a destination. But a significant portion is what researchers call passive consumption. Scrolling without intention, watching without choosing, receiving content that an algorithm selected because it predicted it would produce enough arousal to keep you from leaving. The economic scale of this extraction is difficult to hold in the mind. Meta's 2023 annual revenue was approximately $135 billion. Google's was approximately $307 billion. These are not numbers generated by providing services people pay for. They are numbers generated almost entirely by selling access to attention that users never explicitly agreed to sell. The transaction is structurally invisible. You experience the platform as free. The platform experiences you as inventory. What's psychologically remarkable about this arrangement is how completely it has been normalized. There is no other industry where the product being sold is so thoroughly hidden from the person being sold. When you see an advertisement on a highway, you know you're seeing an advertisement. When you watch a commercial, you know you're watching a commercial. But when an algorithm decides that a particular piece of content, a video, a post, a thread, will produce the optimal level of engagement to keep you on platform long enough to serve you 3 ads, the machinery is entirely invisible. You experience it as the feed, a neutral, organic flow of things that happen to be interesting.
It is neither neutral nor organic. It is a precision instrument. The people who built these systems are not, for the most part, cynics. This is the part of the story that tends to get lost in the outrage. The early architects of the attention economy, the engineers at early Facebook, the product designers at YouTube, the growth hackers at Twitter, were, by most accounts, genuinely idealistic. They believed in connection, in democratizing information, in giving voice to the voiceless. They built engagement optimization because it seemed like the cleanest proxy for value. If people keep coming back, they must be getting something from it. The mistake, and it was a profound one, was in assuming that revealed preference is the same as genuine preference. That what people do, when you've engineered the choice architecture, reflects what they actually want. It doesn't, or at least not necessarily. There's a distinction in philosophy between first-order desires, wanting something in this moment, and second-order desires, wanting to want something. You might want in this moment to keep scrolling, and simultaneously want, on a deeper level of reflection, to be someone who doesn't spend an hour doing that. The system captures the first order. It has no mechanism, no incentive, and no interest in the second. Several of the original engineers who built these systems have since spoken publicly about the gap between what they intended and what they made, not with dramatic confessions of villainy, but with something more unsettling, the quiet recognition that optimization at scale produces outcomes that no individual within the system chose or fully foresaw. The machine became something none of them designed, because no one designed the machine. They designed the incentives. The machine designed itself. Here's what I find most interesting about all of this, once you step back from the anger and the alarm. It's not new. The structure, an industry that profits by capturing attention, that uses every available tool to maximize time on surface, that creates psychological dependency as a side effect of its core business model. This structure is not a product of Silicon Valley. It is at least as old as the printing press, the penny press of the 1830s, the yellow journalism of the 1890s, the soap operas of the 1940s, named after the detergent companies that sponsored them specifically to hold the attention of housewives long enough to run ads. The word soap opera is its own quiet history, a drama designed from the ground up not to tell a story, but to keep an audience captive while a product was sold to them. The genre was invented as an attention extraction mechanism. It then became a cultural form. It then became nostalgia. This pattern repeats. The extraction mechanism precedes the culture. The culture outlasts the extraction mechanism. The extraction mechanism evolves and reasserts itself in a new form. What changes each cycle is scale and precision. The penny press reached thousands. Radio reached millions. Television reached tens of millions. The algorithm reaches billions individually, with personalization so granular that it can distinguish between the content you engage with because you love it and the content you engage with because it makes you anxious. And it serves you more of whichever one produces longer sessions. The mechanism is the same. The magnitude is without historical precedent. There's a thought experiment I keep returning to. Imagine someone who spent their life in 1890, a farmer, a shopkeeper, a schoolteacher. Their attention was claimed by physical labor, by the rhythms of nature, by the people immediately around them. The texture of their inner life, the thoughts that occupied their unstructured hours, was shaped primarily by their own mental habits, their fears, their memories, their hopes. These were their own, in whatever rough sense that phrase means anything.
Now imagine someone today, surrounded, from the moment of waking, by a continuous stream of content that has been individually curated by a system that knows, not guesses, knows which emotional frequencies produce the most durable engagement in that specific person. Their inner life, the texture of what they think about during idle moments, is shaped to a degree that has never existed before in human history by forces entirely external to them, by conflicts they wouldn't have known about, by people they've never met and never will, by outrage about events on the other side of the planet, served because outrage produces longer sessions than contentment. I'm not making an argument here about whether that's good or bad. I'm making an observation about what it is. The interior life, the private weather of your own mind, has become colonized terrain. Not by government, not by overt coercion, but by an economic logic so total and so ambient that most people inside it cannot see its edges. What do we do with this? That's usually where essays like this arrive at solutions. A digital detox, a return to presence, a call to regulate the platforms or reclaim your attention or put your phone in a drawer before bed. I'm not going to do that. Not because those things are wrong, but because they misidentify the register of the problem. Individual behavioral adjustments are responses to a structural condition. You can absolutely put your phone in a drawer. You can install website blockers. You can practice mindfulness and take long walks and cultivate deep work habits. These things help. They are real. But you are doing them inside an environment that will continue operating whether you opt out or not. The 3 billion other people who did not put their phone in a drawer are still generating the data, still training the algorithm, still funding the system that will meet you again the next time you pick the device back up. What I'm more interested in is a prior question, a more uncomfortable one. What does it mean to have an inner life in this environment? Not how do you protect it, but what does it even consist of when so much of what feels like your own thinking is, on inspection, a response to stimuli you didn't choose and can't fully trace? This is not a new problem philosophically. Thinkers from Locke to Kant to the present have grappled with the question of how much of the self is genuinely self-authored versus absorbed from the social and material environment. The answer has always been less than you think. We are more permeable than we want to be. Subjectivity is more borrowed than it appears. But the degree matters. The proportion matters. And right now the proportion has shifted in a direction and at a speed that no previous thinker was equipped to anticipate.
Thank you for staying with Void Wander until the end of this episode. In a world where everything is competing for your attention, The fact that you chose to sit down and actually listen, to me, that means more than you might think. If this episode left something in your mind, even just a small question, a different angle, then it's done its job. See you in the next episode of Void Wander.